If I speak in human and angelic tongues, but do not have love, I am a resounding gong or a clashing cymbal. And if I have the gift of prophecy and comprehend all mysteries and all knowledge, if I have all faith so as to move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away everything I own, and if I hand my body over so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. It is not jealous. Love is not pompous. It is not inflated. It is not rude. It does not seek its own interests. It is not quick-tempered. It does not brood over injury. It does not rejoice over wrongdoing, but rejoices with the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. If there are prophecies, they will be brought to nothing. If tongues, they will cease. If knowledge, it will be brought to nothing. For we know partially, and we prophesy partially. But when the perfect comes, the partial will pass away. When I was a child, I used to talk as a child, think as a child, reason as a child. When I became a man, I put aside childish things. At present, we see indistinctly, as in a mirror, but then face to face. At present, I know partially, then I shall know fully, as I am fully known. So faith, hope, love remain, these three, but the greatest of these is love.
So I want to go a little earlier in my life to start us off. I was maybe 11 years old, and there's a part of me that's always wanted to be a musician, especially a pianist. I always have been jealous of those who sit down and out comes Broadway music, or out comes jazz, out comes classical stuff. And when I was in the 5th grade, Sister Mary Francis came in and said she was going to offer music lessons. $1 a week, which back in the early 1950s was a lot of money, because you could get 4 quarts of milk for $1. You could almost get 10 loaves of bread, etc. But I had this vision in my head. The new Van Cliburn, Ferranti and Teicher, there I was. Now, Sister was a Holy Cross sister. I don't think too many of them were up this way. Those are the ones in Notre Dame. They had the big fans around their head. So what it did is it made their head like 12 inches bigger than usual. So when she would talk, it was like... So I went up and I talked to Sister. I went and persuaded my mother that even though we weren't making that much money in the projects, $1 a week was a great investment. And I began the music lessons. The building where this happened on West 60th Street in New York still exists. In fact, it's being renovated for a community of priests to move into. It was the entry parlor, maybe 10 feet this way, 6 feet that way, little upright piano. Sister would sit on the piano. I would sit next to her, and she would say, "Okay, Francis, find middle C." Then bong, and we go through the lesson. You know, when you learn that they have like these big red wide books with about 4 notes on the page. All cows eat grass, every good boy does fine. So I would look, oh, the first line, E. Then it would like take 20 minutes before it would go through my head, and I'd hit bong, E, and then first space, F, bong. I think I think I drove her crazy. I heard later she lost her mind, and I might have been responsible. I must say I was distracted because I was sitting there wondering how she had that thing on her head and what kind of glue or pins or what have you did they use to do that, etc. But Sister got even. She said, we are going to have a concert in June, and all of the students were going to be part of the concert. And she assigned me the music piece about a slave who gets drunk when the master goes away. Jimmy crack corn, I don't care. Master's gone away. So that's what I had to work on. I had 3 months to work on it. I could barely play one hand, let alone two hands. How was I going to do this? So at that point, my memory wasn't so bad. And I said, well, I'll memorize the right hand. Dun, 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 dun. Memorize the left hand. Ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. And I'd play them together like two tape recorders going off at the same time. So I worked on this, and I worked on this, and I would say 9 out of 10 times I had this thing nailed. It was day for the concert. The building where the concert was taking place, the school building, is gone. It was a kind of a ratty old hall with those kinds of brown folding chairs that made noise all the time. All the students, they're bringing in their aunts and their uncles, their mothers and fathers, etc. So the hall was pretty filled. The concert began. Little Asian kid. He gets up and he bows. And he sits down and he plays Chopin. Everybody applauds. Then next comes the perfect 1950s Catholic schoolgirl. Her uniform without one wrinkle, her blouse immaculately white, just enough freckles to be cute, blonde hair, radiant blue eyes. She gets up and she bows, and she plays Fleur-de-Lis from Beethoven. Da-da-da-da-da-da-dum, ba-da-da-dum. Then it's time for little Francis di Siano. I come up and I bow, and I sit down. And I look at the piano, and I look at my two hands. And literally, I am commanding my hands to play together. So I start off, dun, 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 bum, 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 bum. And everything is going terrific. And it was at that moment that I got one of the great discoveries into human nature. There is inside every single person a very, very subtle need to fail. Because what happened, without my willing it, totally against my desire, my right hand started moving faster than my left. And so I'm looking, saying, slow down, hand. It was like, what was that movie, the Addams movie, you know, where the hand kind of goes off on its own? Slow, slow. And by the time I got to the end of the piece, my right hand was like hanging in the air, and my left hand was still playing the left hand part. So, once again, totally humiliated, I run off the side. My brother's there like this, look at that jerk. My mother is shaking her head. My aunts are all have their heads down. And I go and I sit on the sidewalk on West 60th Street, beautiful June day. And I must be sitting there for 25 or 30 minutes till the concert is over. I see all the legs of the people walking by. Feel my mother tap me on the head. That's the sign. It's time to go home. So there she and my aunts are walking toward the Hudson River west. I'm walking about 10 feet behind them. My brother's gone to play off with his friends, and my sister is gone to where she's going. And my mother turns around and says, well, Frank, I guess we'll have another $1 a week next year, won't we? Yes, we will. But just like yesterday, when I got that idea about what is it that holds us up. The idea I got from my failure to play the piano is one hand goes one way, the other hand goes the other way, and it is almost impossible to get them working together. It's so hard to bring people into unity. It's so hard to bring people into one. It's so hard to create community where everyone feels that they can be involved with everyone else. One hand goes one way, the other hand goes the other way. How can we get them together? So here I am, I'm 70 years old. I grew up, in the 50s, 60s, what have you. And we lived in a world that was divided. There were the communists, and we were the non-communists. And we were doing the air raids, and expecting to get bombed all the time and looking for communists under our beds, who's pinko and all that. But that world is nowhere near as divided as the world in which we're living today. We can't even talk to each other. And we're all running around, and this one's watching this TV station and going to this website, and this one is watching that TV station, going to another website, and they're contradicting each other. And we have a culture where everybody's resenting everybody else. The white, the black, the Latinos, the rich, the poor, those who live over here and those who live over there. First time in my experience that we not only have the have-nots resenting the haves, we have the haves resenting the have-nots. Torn apart. Our government crippled all the time, and it's only going to get worse because we're going to go in and we're going to vote for somebody who's really going to tell it like it is. And the other side is going to go in and vote for somebody who's really going to tell it like it is. And we're going to wonder why everything is immobilized all the time. Why government doesn't work. Because we are divided. Then you look at the world. Who knows what's going on inside of Islam? Sunnis and Shiites, we can't tell these people apart. But there's Iran, and there's Saudi Arabia, and they're each funding all these different groups, and we got all these revolutions going on over there. We're all involved in that. A civil war that may go on for decades. Just like Christians killed each other for centuries in Europe. And Islam is looking at us. Is this the big battle between Islam and the West? The Crusades are starting again? Is this where everything is going to come apart? Unending war, inability to get together, inability to even talk with each other. And then on top of that, we have the problem of isolation. People get into their own little bubbles, and you can't get them out. We saw that first in Columbine. Here we have two young men, good-looking, strong, smart. Families have all the resources and money. They're all professional. Going to a good high school, and these people are so isolated they have to hide behind their black trench coats. And one day they get their father's rifles and guns and they put them under those trench coats and they just start killing their teachers and their fellow students. So isolated they couldn't figure any other way to resolve the hole in which they put themselves. and Columbine is repeated. How often? Every 3 months? Every 4 months? Another isolated person getting another set of weapons, going into a movie theater, going into a school, going into a workplace. And let's just blow people up because I don't know what to do about it. One hand goes one way, the other hand goes the other way. How do we get them working together? And this is even in our relationships with each other. Some of the houses in Virginia are so big. 5,000 square feet, 2 people are living in there. I imagine one is on one side of the house texting the one on the other side of the house. How are you today? I'm not sure. I haven't had my coffee yet. Cute story about a woman who wanted a very, very strict form of religious life. So she searched on the internet, and she found a convent where she was allowed to say only 2 words every 5 years. And so she's happy. She goes into the convent. The first 5 years are up, and here she is. She's going to talk to Mother Abbess. Yes, my daughter, what would you like to say? What are the 2 words you would like to say these 5 years? And Sister looks at Mother Abbess and says, food cold. Mother Abbess says, I'm so sorry your food is cold. We'll try and get it to you warmer. We'll try and warm the plates, etc. Another 5 years go by. Yes, my daughter, what is it you would like to say during these 5 years? Bed hard. Well, I'm sorry, sister, your bed is so hard. We'll try and find a softer mattress for you so you can get a better night's sleep. 5 more years go by. Yes, my daughter, what are the 2 words you'd like to say this time? Sister looks at Mother Abbess and says, I quit. And Mother Abbess looks at her and says, it's just as well you've done nothing but complain since you got in here. What was that movie? We have a failure to communicate. One hand goes one way, the other hand goes the other way. How do we bring them back together? Because the dream of God is that humankind be one. There's a reason the scripture begins with the creation of the one man. We're not talking about biology. We're talking about the human connectedness which is built right into us. From that one man, all humankind comes. And so therefore, fundamentally, you can't be different from me, and I can't be different from you. We are basically the same. And yet from that one man there grows so much isolation because Adam couldn't trust God. Adam couldn't trust that God would care for Adam. And so Adam had to become his own God. And there we have this egocentrism that has absorbed us, and today can absorb us even more because we have so many luxuries to create the world in our image and likeness. So what does the scripture tell us? After Adam, for the next 11 chapters, it's story after story after story of destructiveness, of rebellion against God, of murder, of lust and activity totally out of control, so that When we get to Noah, God is saying, where's the delete button? How do I start all over? I made a mistake with these people. And all that chaos grows until chapter 11, when we have the story of Babel. And the story of Babel is an imagery of human arrogance. Here we are. We are going to build a temple that goes right into heaven itself. And when we build that temple that goes right into heaven, we will be like God. And we will control everything. And in punishment, God creates the different languages. God creates the different tribes. God amplifies the divisions between one and the other. And you can almost write a human history in terms of the inability of human beings to get along with each other. One hand goes one way, the other hand goes the other. Who will bring them together? Another cute story you might have heard. The three deacons. Did you hear this one? So here are these three deacons, and they go on retreat. And the retreat is emotionally very affecting. Each of them feel a tremendous, compunction. And so they go walking out into the woods. And they're talking about how deeply affected they are. And they say, let's just confess to each other among ourselves. And this will be our secret. And so the first deacon says, oh, I love my wife. I would do anything for my children. Nothing is more important to me than my family. But I'm ashamed to say, every once in a while I have looked the other way, have paid attention to women I shouldn't pay attention to. And I've occasionally fallen. I feel terrible. The second deacon says, well, my pastor, he really trusts me. Put me in charge of all the business in the parish. And every Monday morning it's time to count the collection, and I'm the one who opens the bags to put the money there. And I must say, a few little 20s and an occasional 50 end up in my pocket. And it's probably thousands of dollars. I feel terrible about this. And the third deacon looks at the other two and says, oh, I'm so happy I'm not an adulterer. I'm so happy I'm not a thief. I just have a little problem. I can't keep a secret. The Tower of Babel, and we're interested in all of this. I mean, what is Downton Abbey but Tower of Babel amplified all these conflicts? So those are the first 11 chapters of Genesis, and then we have chapter 12, which is so key. It defines Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. God calls Abram. Leave your people, leave your language, leave what you know. Trust me and go on a journey. And I will make you a great people. Your people will be blessed in you. And in you, all of humankind will find a blessing. So Abraham becomes the reverse movement away from Adam. That is, Adam is scattering and bringing people apart and creating all of these divisions that we experience, all of our inability to communicate, all of the hostility, all the violence, all the war, all the murder. Abram, in trust, is beginning another view of the world, where people open their hearts to God, where people follow the Lord. and where God begins to bring humankind together. And all the rest of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Scriptures, all the rest of that can be read as a story of how God is bringing people together and how resistant we have been. This morning we read a vision of Isaiah coming back from Babylon, coming out of exile. Tomorrow we'll read the vision of Ezekiel, this glorified temple from which water flows on all of humankind. And we Christians believe that all of that Hebrew experience, all of their time learning the covenant, breaking the covenant, being restored, all of that was to set the platform for Jesus, in whom we are made one. The new Adam, in whose flesh, Paul says, God has destroyed the enmity we had between us. We are no longer Jew, we are no longer Gentile, we're no longer this, we're no longer that. We are one in Christ. And this then becomes the dream that you and I represent as members of the Catholic Church. God's dream of bringing humankind together into one kingdom of endless love. God's dream is whatever their continent, whatever they are, whatever kind of capacities, whatever kind of limitations, bringing humankind together into this one kingdom. And the apostles go out and they form communities. And these communities have the specific call to represent God's vision of humankind united. God's new dream, where man is at peace with man, where the left hand and the right hand come together. And we heard a little bit from one of those communities, the Corinthians. I think some of you are doing Bible study, are you? Did I see that? You could spend years trying to figure the Corinthians out because they are weird. Sometime you should sit down, or you can get these little tapes. You might even get them on the internet. Just play or sit down and read the letter to the Corinthians entirely. Take maybe 40 minutes. What crazy people! I mean, none of our parishes are as nutty as these people were. Because the first 4 chapters, we see all of the divisions that are going on. I'm smarter than you. I'm holier than you. I have more gifts than you. I can speak this kind of thing. I'm richer than you. Running all the way through. How communities tend to divide themselves on who's on top and who's on the bottom. In spite of the Lord who took off his robe and washed the dirty feet of his apostles. 5th chapter. There's a man who has married his own stepmother and nobody thinks there's a problem with this. 6th chapter. The young people of the community are running around the red light district and then coming into the Eucharist. Nobody thinks there's a problem with this. 7th chapter, some people are saying you can't even touch a woman. Other people are saying, oh, you're already forgiven, you could do whatever you want. So you have the Puritans on the one hand and the libertines on the other hand. 8th, 9th, 10th chapter, all the arguments about whether we can eat meat that's offered to idols. And what does that mean? And what if somebody thinks it's a sin and I sit down and I eat it? What does he think about me? The 11th chapter, Paul talks about the one body of Christ how we all begin to belong to each other. And he brings that into the 12th chapter. And then we have number 13. This is such a hard passage to understand because we think it's a Hallmark greeting card. We hear it with violins. All the little bridelings, they all want this passage read at their wedding. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not put on airs. You can feel the tissues coming out as the mothers wipe their eyes. And the vision that God has of love is not primarily romantic. And what Paul is doing here is not basically romance. So my insight into the limitations of romantic love go back to 1971. I was ordained as a deacon and sent out to Portland, Oregon, and I had some weddings where I had to learn how you do all these things. And Oregon, only 1 in 10 people are religious. Percentage of Catholics is very small. So it's a state where Catholics were likely to marry non-Catholics outside the church, and their weddings, therefore, would be invalid. So here comes a couple. He's been married before. She's been married before. He's married outside the church. She's married outside the church. I get the documents proving that they were married outside the church, proving that they were baptized, bring them over. The chancellor stamps them. Both marriages are null and void. So I go back to this couple and I say, great news. You can get married in the Catholic Church. Your marriages have been annulled. And they're so ecstatic about it. And the lady leans over and says, oh, Father Frank, would it be possible for us to have a candlelight wedding? And I kind of wrinkle my eyes. I grew up in the projects, so we only used candles when the fuse blew. What's a candlelight wedding? I said. She said, oh, that's a wedding where we have candles in the church and that's the light we use. I said, well, how do you read the book? She said, a couple of lights. So we compromised a few lights, and since I was a new person, 1970s, you always said yes. We were nice back then, you know. Oh, sure, I have candlelight, you know. So the night of the candlelight wedding, the sanctuary must have been 200 candles, all of them dripping wax on the rug. The pastor was ready to murder me. You could barely see inside the church. The men come down and they line up. Then the bridesmaids come down. They all have bouquets, and every bouquet has a candle in it. And they're kind of coming down. Dun, 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 dun. And they line up over here. So you got to get the scene. All these candles behind us. Almost total darkness in the church. Here's the groom. Here's the bride. I'm the cool priest. I'm going to have them say their own vows. I turn the book. He's reciting his vows. I so-and-so take you so-and-so. And he says the name of his first wife. He said the wrong name. Well, how do you recover from this? It's not easy. So I just put the book over my face and I went. He starts laughing hysterically. The bride starts laughing hysterically. All the bridesmaids have the candles going up, down. I mean, the church broke out into uncontrolled laughter for 2 solid minutes. So there is the romantic view of love, I tell you. The candles are dripping on the floor, and the groom can't get the name of his wife straight. What is Paul doing in this passage? Paul is laying onto the Corinthians all the things they've not been able to do, and he is jamming them one after another after another. Love is patient, but not you guys. Love is kind, but I don't see it in you Corinthians. Love doesn't walk around arrogant and proud, but that's all you Corinthians have been. Love doesn't hold it over someone else. Love doesn't want somebody else to look worse. That's all you people are doing. Paul is tossing insult after insult in the form of this beautiful hymn of love, because he's speaking to a community that doesn't quite get it. To be communities of love, to manifest God's good news by the way we relate to each other, to be, as Christ says, they will know you are Christians, you are my followers, by the way you love each other. And you can go through the whole New Testament, and maybe the Philippians get off a little well. But every single community there has had its problems. And every single community since then, all of us Christian communities have been struggling to manifest God's vision of love. Tell the story of the homeless man in New York. It was cold and wet, and he wanted to go into one of those Fifth Avenue churches. Not St. Patrick's. And he goes in, and the usher says, "What are you doing in here? Get out of there. You don't belong here." The next Sunday, once again, he tries to get into the church, and the usher kicks him out. So he's walking down Fifth Avenue, fairly dejected, and Jesus appears next to him. And he says, "Jesus, I feel so terrible. I keep trying to get into that church, and they won't let me." And Jesus says, "Well, I've been trying to get into that church too, and they haven't let me in either." Pope Francis is so clear about this, that it is through our love and our compassion and our willingness to accept each other, especially in our differences, especially those who are not connected, those who are marginalized, those who are poor, and there are all kinds of poverty for them, spiritual, cultural, intellectual, poverty of relationship, probably the biggest poverty in our culture. And so what do we do? Well, we look at the Corinthians. How do we do as churches and parishes when it comes to representing God's love? Well, you can go to Washington, D.C., and you can talk to almost any African-American Catholic who came into the church in the late 50s, throughout the 60s, into the 70s. And the Archbishop in Washington was enlightened because he was ahead of the curve when it came to breaking down segregation. Ahead of the curve, ahead of society, ordering his schools to be integrated and ordering his parishes to be integrated because they had separate ones before then. And they will tell you, the African Americans, when they went to church, the pastors told them to sit in the back of the church or to sit upstairs in the organ loft, or else go to your own church. New York City, I remember as a kid, the Puerto Ricans were coming. How could the Irish begin to understand the Puerto Ricans? They put them in the basement of the church. And that's where they had Mass, not for 2 years or 5 years or 10 years, but for decades. For decades before they could come up and have their Mass in the upper church. Good friend of mine, lives in Buffalo now. He was in my teen club. He's probably about 50 years old at this point. Wonderful Puerto Rican man, married a wonderful Puerto Rican girl, incredibly devout, faithful in the church, raising their 4 children. He goes to a church that's called the Italian Church. There are maybe 6 Italians left, but it's the Italian Church. And so they're having one bigger mass one day, so we all could be together as community. And he's carrying his 2-year-old boy, and then there's the 7-year-old, and then there's the 9-year-old, then there's my goddaughter who's 12 years old, and the mother, and he's making his way into the pew when he feels a stab in his back. Another stab in his back. And he turns around, and there is one of the sweet little Italian ladies with an umbrella. And she's stabbing him in the back, saying, sit down, I can't see. Welcome to our community of love. New York City, Church of St. Paul the Apostle, probably 3 times as big as your beautiful church here. I was pastor there. During the time of crack and crime, took all my efforts to get 800 or 900 people to come to all the masses together. 5:15 mass on Saturday night. The people who go to the opera come to the mass, then they go and dinner, and then they go to the opera. Put it all together, you know. And so, at the end of one of these masses, I'm in the back. Thank you for coming, thank you for coming. And 3 lovely ladies come. Oh, Father Frank, we love coming to your church. I think, well, maybe it's the beautiful architecture. John Lafarge, Stanford White, can't get better than that. Maybe it's the music program, because we continue to try and keep that going even though we were broke and bankrupt. Maybe it's the preaching of the Paulist fathers. Oh, Father Frank, we love coming to your church. It's so big we don't have to sit next to anybody else. I get it now. Jesus died on the cross so you could have your own pew and not sit next to anybody else. I mean, think about it. The way we behave with each other sends vibrations out. We come to church and our arms are folded. We come to church, we don't touch a hymnal. We come to church at the kiss of peace. I knew one lady that would bring surgical gloves for the kiss of peace. At least she tried. Our behaviors as we are with each other is saying how we relate to each other. And young people coming to church are looking at us and saying, what is going on here? So I was in Scranton doing a mission. All the churches in Scranton had one bigger mission. And I had to do mass at a chapel. There were churches all over the place, you know. So I go over to this chapel. The chapel is maybe 2/3 the size of this. It was a pretty big space. 7 o'clock mass in the morning. 7 people at mass. So the reader is in the first pew. The server is in the second pew. And the other 5 people are in the last pew of the church. The Lord be with you, with you, with you, with you. I mean, you really scratch your head. Here we are. I confess, Almighty God, and you, my brothers and my sisters, but I'm going to pretend I don't know you, and you're going to pretend you don't know me, and we're going to make this thing a nice anonymous get-together where you're in your space and I'm in my space. And one hand goes one way and the other hand goes the other way. And Christ dies on the cross to bring us into unity, sends his own Holy Spirit into all of our hearts, making us one, and calls us up to receive the very same body and blood, the same blood running through all of our veins. And yet it's so hard for us to live this, to show it, to manifest the good news that God has broken down the enmity between us. And God is reconciling the world. We had it on Sunday. Reconciling the world by the way we are reconciled with each other. So let me close with a story. I want to present the story of a woman, Hannah. Very important in my life, but it takes me a little while to get there. I was named pastor at St. Paul the Apostle in 1978. I was fairly young. And in 1979, someone anonymously slipped under my door a flyer. And the flyer said, "How to be an effective pastor workshops." Okay, I can take a hint. No, I'm not going to be proud. So at the Jesuit retreat house in Staten Island, people were going to do workshops on parish, and these were some of the greatest workshops I ever went to. Really wonderful things about leadership and community dynamics, etc., etc. But there was one workshop that I never forgot. The facilitator says, imagine you're in a car wreck, or you have some terrible disease, and you're in ICU, and you're slowly coming to consciousness. You realize somebody's at your side. Who is it that you see? So I went through, imagine I got hit by a taxi on 9th Avenue, which was quite likely, dragged into Roosevelt Hospital emergency room, ICU, and I'm slowly waking up. And as I'm going through the exercise, I don't see my mother, I don't see my father, I don't see my twin sister, I don't see anybody in my family. I see the president of the parish council. This one lady who was magnificent, a genius in New York at pulling people together, looking out for the stranger. Who doesn't belong? Who can I introduce? Who can I bring together? How do I get these people in the project sitting next to these people on Central Park South? How do I get the medical people in Roosevelt sitting together with the people that they were serving in the emergency room? She's a wonderful lady. And she was really key to that parish for the 9 years I was pastor. Then 2 or 3 years after that, I got a call from her. I was in Washington, D.C. "Hi, Hannah, how are you?" She says, "Not so good." She says, "Remember that iron that was always in my blood? Hemochromatosis? Said it's destroyed my liver. And the doctors really don't know what's going to happen. So I'm waiting for them to see what can be done." The very next day, I got a call from her best friend that she died that night. And so here I was, this wonderful lady whom I imagined would be at my bedside, and I wasn't able to be at hers. Her funeral was going to be 3 nights later in the evening. Took the train up from Washington, walked from 33rd up to 59th Street. I had so much grief, so much feeling to work off. I got to walk another 100 blocks. Was at the Mass. Fortunately, didn't have to do anything at the Mass. Sat on the side with the other priests, about 20 priests that were there celebrating. I looked out at this congregation. There were over 1,000 people there. And I drew a mental line between her casket and the people who were there. He was the pastoral council where she had served for so many years. Here were the kids in 6th grade, generations of them that she had taught. Here were the people at Project Find, this group that took care of senior people. Every single Thanksgiving, this woman help us serve 1,500 meals for senior people. And over here, the people from the synagogue, where we would do social programs with them, have this ecumenical relationship. All these lines I was drawing between her and this whole congregation. And it became so clear to me, our parishes are not our churches, are not our buildings, are not our altars, are not our stained glass windows, not the art, not the pretty rugs. Our parishes are ourselves. The relationships that we are to each other. How we become brothers and sisters, how we reach out beyond ourselves. How we look to involve people on the edge. How we look for the one that seems strange and bring them into our circle. That's the vision, the dream that God began with Abram. And that's the vision to which God calls every single Catholic parish to be a servant and an agent.